Hello, my name is Dr. Stephen Bradburn from TopTipBio.com, and in this video tutorial I will show you 3 ways to combine bars and plots onto the same graph. Combining bars and plots is a great way to show multiple data with different measures and scales onto the same graph. In the first example, this is a bar graph with some datasets plotted as points, and these points are connected like a line graph. In the second example, we'll create a similar type of graph with a bar graph and some points plotted, but here a line of best fit is plotted to fit over the points. Third and final approach is to create 2 graphs, a box plot and a before and after plot in this case, and superimpose them on the page layout. So let's go ahead and start the first example. So within Prism, I'm going to select an XY table and graph. I'm going to enter import data into a new table. My X values are going to be numbers, and the Y values I'm going to enter and plot a single Y value for each point, and then click the Create button. I'm just going to paste in the data that I've prepared earlier. So notice this data contains 4 groups. The first 2 are placebo and drug-treated rats with measures of their tumour growth inhibition ratio, or T/C, and the latter 2 are the rats' weight in grams per week. Each row corresponds to a different experimental week, and as you can see in the X column, this corresponds to the week number, and each data point here are average values of 5 replicates. So to make the graph, since we have our data entered, we click on the connected graph sheet on the left hand window, and then what we want to do is select the points only option and then click OK. And as it is, the 4 datasets are plotted as an XY graph. But what I want to do is plot 2 of these datasets as bar graphs and 2 of them as XY or data points. So to do this, I'm just going to go to the Format Graph window by clicking at the button at the top. The first thing I'm going to do is change my first dataset, which is the placebo TC ratio. I'm going to plot this on a right y-axis because it uses a different scale to those of the grams per week datasets. And then click Apply. So notice now we have a right y-axis. I'm just going to toggle my dataset to the next one along, which is the drug TC ratio, and do the same thing. So the right y-axis I'm going to enable and click Apply. So now the 2 TC ratio datasets are plotted by using the right y-axis, and the other 2 datasets, the weight in grams per week, are plotted using the left y-axis. So I'm just going to toggle now to my placebo weight grams per week dataset, and these are the ones that I want to plot as bar graphs. So I'm going to untick the Show Symbols option, and instead tick the Show Bars, Spikes and Drop Lines option. And I'm going to change the border thickness in this case to be a half a point, and I'm also going to change the bar colour from grey to black, and then click Apply. So notice now instead of an XY plot, this has been turned into a bar graph. Now I'm going to toggle to my drug treated group with the weight in grams per week. I'm going to do a similar thing by unticking the Show Symbols option and ticking the Show Bars, Spikes and Drop Lines option. In this case I'm going to change the colour to be blue, and then I'm also going to again change the border thickness to be half a point and then click Apply. So notice here that the drug treated group is actually behind the placebo treated group, so you can't actually see it on the graph currently. So what I want to do here is to use the nudge function in Prism to move the drug treated group, the blue bar graph, slightly to the right on the x-axis to have it placed next to the placebo treated group, the black bars. And to do this, I'm going to go to the Datasets on Graph tab. I'm going to select my bottom group, the drug treated group in grams per week, and at the bottom I'm going to click the Nudge All Points. I'm going to change X to be 0.5 and then click the Apply button. So notice now that you can see the drug treated group next to the placebo treated group because they've been nudged along slightly. So I'm just going to toggle back to the Appearance tab, and I'm going to go to my very first dataset, and I'm going to change the appearance of my placebo treated TC ratio group. So here I'm going to tick the option to show a connecting line or curve. to make it a line graph. And I'm also going to change the colour of my symbols and my line to be a beige colour with a semi-transparency about it. And these are the options here at the bottom. So the second one along I'm going to select. And because this is 50% transparent, it means that where the points overlap, you'll be able to see what's behind it, which is always very useful, especially when data are very condensed together. So I'm going to click the Apply button. So as you can see here, there's now a connecting line between the points. And because there's a transparency on this, you can see in this area here, you can actually see what's behind it. In this case, one of the drug-treated data points is actually behind this. So it's always important to use a colour with some transparency in this scenario. I'm also going to change the symbol size from 4 to 3 to make them slightly smaller. Click Apply. So I'm happy with the placebo group here. I'm going to shift along to my drug-treated group for the TC ratio and do a similar thing where I'm going to show a connecting line and curve. I'm going to change the colour of the symbols and line in this case to red. And again, I want it to be slightly transparent, so I'm going to select this option here with a 50% transparency. And I'm going to change the symbol size again from 4 to 3 and click Apply. So again, this looks a bit better now. We can actually see both of the line graphs on top of the bar graphs. The final thing I've just noticed is you'll see that there's some triangles above the bar graphs, and this is because the symbols option is enabled. So I'm going to untick the Show to Symbols option on the grams per week datasets, and then click the Apply button. Now this is a bar graph with no symbols shown. Now I can click the OK button to return to the graph. So notice now that the graph looks a bit squashed in the middle, and there's a lot of space either side of the graph, and this is because we need to alter and tweak the axes. So to do this, I'm just going to select the Format Axes button at the top. I'm going to firstly change the x-axis. I'm going to untick the automatically determine the range and interval option, because GraphPad usually determines the range and intervals of the axes. In this case, I'm going to manually change this to set a minimum value of -2 and a maximum value of 13. And I'm also going to change the major tick interval. So this is how often the ticks underneath on the x-axis are shown, from being every 5 value to be every 1 value. And then click Apply. So this is looking a lot better now. You can actually see all of the data sets because we've essentially zoomed in on the data. It just looks a bit more presentable. I'm going to click the OK button to return to the graph. To finish off, I'm just going to give the axes some titles. So the left y-axis, I'm going to change this to weight change in grams per week, and also going to indicate in brackets that this is for the bar data sets. And what I'm going to do is just highlight by clicking and dragging on my mouse and moving my legend. I'm going to place it inside the figure, and I'm going to change my right y-axis title to be tumour growth inhibition, TC ratio and points in brackets, because that corresponds to the points in the line graph. And then I'm also, just for this case, just going to delete my title. So there we have the finished product. We've got 2 datasets as bar graphs and also 2 datasets as data points, and they're plotted using a line graph. So let's now move on to the next type of graph, which is the bar graph with some data points plotted, but this time I'm going to plot a line of best fit instead of a connecting line. So for this, I'm just going to go to File, New Data Table and Graph. And again, I'm going to select an XY type of table and graph. I'm going to enter import data into a new table. My X values are going to be numbers, and my Y values are going to be enter import error values already calculated elsewhere. I'm going to change this to be mean and standard deviation, and then click Create. So again, I'm just going to paste in the data that I've prepared earlier. So in this example, the X values are time in seconds. Group A is the plasma concentration levels of a certain drug, and Group B is the fractional enzyme activity of the same samples. So again, while we've entered our data, I'm going to click on the connected graph sheet, and in this example, I'm going to select the points with error bars. I'm going to leave the error bars as standard deviation because that is what we have in our data. I'm going to click the OK button to go to the graph. So again, let's go ahead and format this graph. So I want to go to the Format Graph button at the top. So with my enzyme activity dataset selected, I'm going to click to show right y-axis for this because I want it plotting on a different axis because it's measured in a different scale. Then click apply. I'm going to untick the show symbols options, and I'm going to tick to show bars, spikes and drop lines because I want this dataset to be the bar graph. I'm going to change the color to be a blue color, and I'm going to change the width of the bars to be slightly wider, so from 4 to 5. I'm going to change the border thickness to be half a point, and I'm going to change the border color to be the same blue that I've selected for the fill. Then click apply. So notice now the enzyme activity dataset applied as bar graphs, whereas the plasma concentration dataset is plotted using the left y-axis and are shown as data points with error bars. I'm also going to tweak the error bars. So in this case, I'm just going to change the thickness from 2 to 1 because I think they're slightly too thick at the minute, and click the apply button. So I'm happy with that dataset. So I'm going to toggle now to my first dataset, where I'm going to change the color of my symbols to be a red color. I'm going to change the symbol size from 4 to 3 to make them slightly smaller, and I'm going to change the error bar thickness to be 2 to 1, and then click apply. And then what I'll do is I'll click OK to return to the graph. So now you can see that we've got our plasma drug level on the left y-axis, which are the data points now in red, and the enzyme activity dataset and as a bar graph, which are plotted using the right y-axis. So again, like the first example, we need to tweak the axes to make it a bit more presentable. So I'm just going to go to the Format Axes button at the top, and firstly, what I'm going to do is change the right y-axis, and I'm going to change the maximum level to be 1.2, and the major tick interval for it to be 0.2, and click apply. So that's making good use of the right y-axis. I'm just going to go now to the left y-axis, and I'm going to change the maximum value here to be 12 and the major tick interval to be 2, and then click apply. And finally, going to the x-axis, I'm going to change the minimum value to be -50 and a maximum value of 320. I'm going to give the major tick intervals to be 60 and the minor ticks, so these are the smaller ticks in the middle which are plotted but don't have a number. I'm going to change this from being auto to be 2, and then click apply, and then I'll click OK to return to the graph. So what I've done there is just adjusted the y-axis and the x-axis just to make the data fit a lot better on the graph itself. So now we have that, the final thing we want to do is plot a line of best fit through the plasma drug level dataset, and in this case it will be a nonlinear regression. So to do this, you want to click the Analyze button at the top, and then under the XY analyses I'm going to select nonlinear regression, and in the right window you need to specify what data set it is you want to analyze. And in this case I'm going to untick my enzyme activity because I want to do this on the plasma drug level dataset, and then select OK. There's many different types of curves that you can fit, and then the one that I'm going to use is the exponential. So I'm going to click this to expand all the options, and I'm going to select the one phase decay option, and then click OK. So as you can see now, a nonlinear curve has been plotted through the plasma drug level, and it is also in a red color, which is great because it matches that of the symbols. So final things I'm going to do before I finish off this graph is change the left y-axis title to be plasma concentration in milligrams per mil, and again in brackets I'm specifying that this is the curve data set. Let's move the figure legend to again inside the graph, and I'm going to change my right y-axis title to be fractional enzyme activity and then bars, because this is for the bar data set. And then my x title, I'm just going to adjust this to be time, change this to be seconds in brackets because that's the units, and then again let's delete the graph title. So there we have the finished product. Let's now move on to the third and final option of combining bars and plots onto the same graph, and for this one I'm going to go to File, New Data Table and Graph again. So in this example I'm going to create a box plot and overlay a before and after plot onto it. And the way we're going to do that is through the layout option within Prism. Now let's firstly create the box plot. I'm going to select a column type of table and graph. I'm going to enter import data into a new table and enter replicate values stacked into columns, and then click the create button. So again, I'm just going to paste in the data that I have already prepared. This data just contains 3 data sets of different animals, so we've got cats, dogs and mice, and we've got some form of measure. So let's firstly go to the graph by clicking on the connected graph in the left hand window, and in this case I'm going to select the box and violin option, and I'm going to leave this as the floating bars option, and then click OK. So what I want to do here is just change the colour of my boxes. So to do this, I want to go to the format graph button at the top, and then I'm going to change the colour of my cats dataset to be blue. So I'm going to change the border colour to be a blue colour. I'm going to toggle now to my dogs dataset and change the border colour to be red. And then finally I'm going to toggle again to the mice dataset, and I'm going to change this colour to be green. And then click the OK button. So now I just simply have 3 different box plots, and they're all different colours corresponding to a different group. So now we have our box plot. I'm going to go ahead and create a before and after plot, but using the same data set. Now to do this, I want to duplicate the data set that I'm currently using. So I'm going to right click on the data-free data set. I'm going to click on duplicate current sheet. In this case, I'm just going to double click. I'm going to rename this one to be before, after. And I'm going to rename data-free to be box plot, just so it makes it a bit easier for us to understand which is which. Now, with the before and after dataset selected, I'm going to create a new graph by clicking the new graph button. And in this case, I want to plot individual values, and I want to show symbols and lines, and then click the OK button. So here we have a before and after plot, it's connected by different lines for my cats, dogs and mice dataset. So what I'm going to do is just tweak the appearance of this graph by going to the format graph button at the top. And what I'm going to do is change the colour of my datasets to match that of the box plots. So I'm going to change the symbol colour this time. So for the cats this was blue. For dogs this was red. And for mice this was green. And then click the OK button. So notice now that these match the colours that are currently in the box and whisker plot. What I want to do now is prepare the graphs to be overlaid in the layout window. Now to do this, what I want to do is delete the axes titles on my before and after plot. I'm also going to delete the graph title, and then I'm going to toggle to my box plot. And what I want to do here is actually remove the axes labels and make the frame slightly thinner. So what I'm going to do is delete the axes titles for this graph as well. Then I'm going to go to the Format Axes button at the top. With the Frame and Origin tab selected, I'm going to change the thickness of the axes from 1 point to be half a point. And then click the Apply button. Notice that the frame or the axes are actually slightly thinner. I'm going to go to X-axes, and what I want to do now is remove any of the ticks and numbering and labeling from this graph. So I'm going to change the tick direction to be none, and the location of numbering and labeling to be none also. I'm going to repeat this process for the left y-axis. Again, I'm going to change the tick direction to be none, and the location of numbering to be none. And I'm going to click the OK button. So notice now that essentially all we have is our box plot, and it's just a blank y-axis and a blank x-axis. And that's because we're going to overlay it with this graph, which already has our labeling and numbering on our x and y axes. And to do this, I'm going to scroll down on the left window, and I'm going to click New Layout. And for this, I'm going to just enter 2 graphs. So I'm just going to select this option here, and then click the OK button. Now for the top graph, I'm going to double click on this. You can actually then select which graph it is you want to place on the new layout. Let's firstly select the box plot, and then click OK. And then for the one underneath, I'm going to double click on this again, and this one's going to be the before and after plot, and then click OK. So what you'll notice now is that the graphs are actually different sizes, and this is because the before and after plot contains labeling and numbering, which is making the scaling a bit smaller compared to the box plot. Now, to make the scaling the same on multiple graphs on the layout, you want to use the Equalize Scaling Factors option, which can be found at the top here. And in this option, you can reduce the scaling factors to match that of the smallest, which is currently set as 181%, and this would be my before and after plot. Or I could increase the scaling factors to match that of the largest, which is the box plot set at 220%. Or you can set all scaling factors to whatever number you specify. So what I'm going to do is reduce the scaling factors to match that of the smallest. So what this would mean is the box plot will be reduced in size to be made the same size as that of the before and after plot. I'm going to click the OK button. So notice they're both the same size, and this is very important when you're overlaying graphs because you need the axes to be the same scale and size. The last thing we need to do is actually overlay the two graphs. So I'm going to click and drag the before and after plot onto my box plot. Zoom in a bit more. And then simply click and drag and move the graph into position. So what I'm doing is overlaying it exactly with the box plot. So as you can see, we've got our box plot in the background, and in the foreground we've got our before and after plot with the same data sets plotted, but they're just showing different things. So the before and after plot is obviously showing the individual data points for each data set, and they're connected by lines, each line corresponding to the same row on the datasheet. So that wraps up the third and final example. So in this video tutorial, you've learnt 3 ways to combine bars and plots onto the same graph. In the first example, this is a bar graph with some data points plotted, and these points are connected like a line graph. And in the second example, there's a similar thing where there is a bar graph plotted with some data points, and there's also in this case a line of best fit, which is a nonlinear curve, plotted to fit over the data points. And the third and final example is a box plot and a before and after plot, which have been created separately, but we have superimposed them onto the page layout to overlay to make it look like the same plot. Did you like this video? Be sure to give it a like or leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to be notified when a new video is added.